Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I haven't talked at all about Comet NEOWISE, and that is a tragedy. Let's change that today and talk a little bit about Comet NEOWISE, kind of the best ways to view it, and more importantly, well, depending on who you are, more interestingly, at least to me, I want to talk about some nitty-gritty details of Comet NEOWISE. So let's start there with some data and some stats. I'm probably going to pull up the Stellarium app on my phone and see what kind of raw data, real-time data I can get about NEOWISE. But let's start with some other data. Let's start with when NEOWISE was first discovered. So Comet NEOWISE, its technical name is Comet C/2020 F3. NEOWISE. It was discovered March 27th, 2020, and it wasn't discovered by any earthbound telescope. It was discovered by an observatory that's orbiting our planet, 326 miles above the surface to be exact. And it is named after its discoverer, the Near-Earth Object Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, aka NEOWISE, and it was launched by NASA back in 2009. I'm reading some of this from a website called earthsky.org. It's a great website. I will include the link in the podcast description below. Comet NEOWISE got its closest to the sun on July 3rd, and it passed about 26.7 million miles from the sun. That's a pretty close encounter with the sun, and it survived, and it's helped it throw off its tail, its large tail, and that's kind of where we're at right now with Comet NEOWISE. It's still going to be visible for the next several days. One of the common themes here with NEOWISE is that some people, and this highly depends on where you are in the world. The further south you are in the northern hemisphere, the harder time you're going to have finding and locating NEOWISE. It's below the Big Dipper. So if you're looking at the bottom of the Big Dipper, of the pan part of the Big Dipper, the spoon part of the Big Dipper, it's kind of directly below that, more towards the horizon. And since it's towards the horizon right now, that's what makes it harder for people the further south you are to see Comet NEOWISE. If you are in the southern hemisphere, South America, Central America, thereabouts, well, Ecuador, I guess, technically is the southern hemisphere, you're going to have a hard time seeing it because it's going to be so low on the horizon. It can be even below the horizon, depending where you are in the world. So for me in Texas, I haven't seen it yet. I know that it is visible, but my drive home from work is kind of later in the evening. I get home probably around 8:30 p.m., and I think by then it's starting to dip a little bit below the trees, at least, not necessarily the horizon, but the trees and houses. I can't really see it. I'm still looking for it. By and large, most people are going to need binoculars. No matter where you are in the world, you're going to need some sort of aid to help your eye see it. But I have read that once you find it in the binoculars, you can take off your you can lower the binoculars, and you can see just a fuzzy, dim dot on the horizon there, or just above the horizon to the northwest. If you don't know where the northwest is in your region, wherever your house or your apartment, wherever you are, northwest, just wherever the sun sets, and then turn a little bit to the right. That's just about northwest-ish. The sun doesn't set in exact west, 270 degrees west. The sun sets due west. So if you look where the sun sets and turn a little to the right, that's northwest. But look for the Big Dipper. You can't miss the Big Dipper. and it's just below the Big Dipper. Okay, so Comet NEOWISE. I'm on Stellarium right here. Let's look at some of the data here. Its magnitude is 3.70, which on the grand scheme of things it's visible. I mean, it's visible to the naked eye in good settings. So for some comparison, the magnitude of the moon is negative 1.62. And the magnitude of the sun is negative 26.71. It's the brightest object in our sky. So NEOWISE, the further negative you get, the brighter and brighter and brighter something is, which the brightest thing we can view, like I just said, is negative 26.71 in magnitude, and that's the sun. NEOWISE is at a magnitude of 3.65. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Come on. NEOWISE, yeah, 3.70. So it's dim, but it's still visible. Its distance, what is it? The distance right now from Earth, I want to say it's about 64 million miles. And as another point of reference, the sun is about 93 million miles from Earth. So NEOWISE is a little bit closer to the Earth than the sun at just 64 million miles. I want to talk about ways that you can help you see it. One, I haven't tried this, but it'd be worth some tinkering and some experimentation. Even though I know smartphone cameras are so good these days, they still struggle with applications like this where you do long exposure. See if you can get your phone to do long exposure. Go into pro photo mode of your phone and try to do an exposure looking out to the northwest below the Big Dipper, that region of the sky, and set your exposure setting to a few seconds up to several seconds. That'll capture a lot of light. You're going to definitely need a tripod for this for the most part. Although it's worth mentioning that a lot of phones have night mode. Maybe try snapping a picture of that sector of the sky in night mode and see if that kind of brings it out. I highly doubt with a smartphone, again, as good as the cameras are, that it's going to capture the tail of NEOWISE just with your smartphone. But it's worth tinkering with a smartphone to see what it can do. The iris of a smartphone just flat out isn't very big. There just isn't a whole lot of light that the actual lens can capture. It's a very small device. If you have a DSLR camera you have more control over function. It's a much bigger aperture. I think you'll have better results. Put it on a tripod, put it in that section of the sky, and I would say select a fairly, it depends on the camera, but I would say start at ISO 400, ISO 800, and maybe take a shot of the sky at about 15 seconds of a shutter speed. Would probably be okay, and go from there, either more or less on the ISO or the exposure, and see where you go from there. Good DSLR cameras are great for astrophotography because they have a bigger sensor than your smartphone, obviously. You have more control over the settings. You can leave, depending on what camera you have, you can leave the iris open for hours on end. And that's how astrophotographers get shots of deep galaxies and deep space objects, is because they have cameras that allow the exposure to be open for hours at a time and on a tracking mount. If you open the exposure for hours at a time, just aimed at one section of the sky, the stars are going to move and you're going to get that swirl effect. All the stars are going to have trails on them. And it looks cool, but you're not going to see anything with any appreciable sharpness except what's exactly in the center of the shot. So if you have a decent camera and a decent telescope and T-mounts and all the mounting hardware you need to mount your camera to your telescope, you will have better results there. I just spent the last night stargazing. It's something I haven't done in a while. I've seen Saturn and Jupiter up in the sky for the past few months, very bright dots. If you're in the northern hemisphere and you're looking up in the sky and the sun's not out and the moon's not out, those two really, really bright dots are Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter's way brighter than Saturn, but Saturn is just a little bit to the left, bottom left of Jupiter. Is it bottom left? I forget now in my head. It's just to the left of Saturn. Anyways, I spent a few hours last night stargazing. I told myself, I was looking through the eyepiece, showing my wife very impressive views of Saturn and of Jupiter. And I thought I'd kick myself if I didn't bust out the camera hardware and do a little bit of AP out here, a little bit of astrophotography. And if you follow my Instagram, Geek Therapy Radio on Instagram, I posted the results of that. It's very cool. I have an 8-inch Dobsonian, I think it's an Orion XT8, 8-inch Dobsonian telescope. And I have a few eyepieces, 10 millimeter, 20 millimeter, 25 millimeter, 6 millimeter. A bunch of adapters, focal tubes and T adapters and T-ring adapters and all in Barlows, 2x Barlows, 3x Barlows, all sorts of stuff that connects it up to my camera and magnifies the power of eyepieces and blah, blah, blah. I was able to take some really neat shots of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter, you can clearly see the red spot and the different layers of the atmosphere, and you can see 4 of its moons were very, very brightly visible last night. Saturn is always a crowd pleaser. It is always impressive to look at. I've never seen Saturn in my lifetime, not to say that it hasn't happened, but I've never looked at Saturn in my lifetime of getting into telescopes, maybe from my 20s onward. I've never seen it edge on. I've never seen the rings edge on. I've always seen them at a more oblique angle so you can see more of the rings and patterns, and a few times the actual planet itself casting an awesome shadow across the rings. And it's a funny story. I don't know if I've shared this on Geek Therapy Radio or not. One night in 2013-ish, I believe, 2012, 2013, 2012. I was living in Montrose. It was wintertime. I think it was December at some point. It's pretty chilly out. One of my neighbors was, I'll just say, kind of a hippie. And a lot of people, when they look through the eyepiece and I show them Saturn, they're just like, wow, that's really cool. I mean, it almost looks fake, man. And you start talking about moon landing theories and all sorts of stuff. But this one neighbor just refused to believe it. He was definitely under the influence of something, but you could not convince him that what he was looking at through the telescope was really Saturn. He's like, that looks exactly like it looks in a textbook. It's just, I can't believe that that's real. There's no way that that is up there right now. I'm like, dude, it's a waste of time for me to try to convince you because of your current altered state of mind, but it is very much real, and it is really up there, and you're looking at it in real time right now as it exists in outer space, minus a couple minutes because light has to travel, but you get the idea. The point is, people are usually very impressed with Saturn through the eyepiece of a telescope, and the thing is with Saturn and Jupiter, you don't need a very powerful telescope. I have spoken on the show a few times of $50 telescopes I recommend. Just basically put in a budget for a $50 telescope and you can find a 4-inch scope or a 3-inch scope. Sometimes they'll be marked kids telescope, starter pack, whatever. It doesn't matter. A telescope is a telescope. It's a reflecting telescope. It's got a mirror in it. It's got an eyepiece in it. It's all you need. It doesn't matter what it's branded as a junior telescope or whatever. If it's a 3-inch scope or 4-inch scope, you're going to see plenty of the solar system, especially in some nebula, like the Orion Nebula, with those smaller diameter telescopes. Saturn is clearly and impressively visible with any of those little $50 starter quote-unquote telescopes. It's one of the cheaper hobbies to get into, but it's also one of the most rewarding hobbies to get into. You would absolutely be able to see NEOWISE, the comet NEOWISE, with just a kid's quote-unquote 3-inch telescope and a 20 millimeter eyepiece for sure, 25 millimeter eyepiece for sure. When you get smaller in millimeter for eyepieces, that's more magnification you get, and the more magnification you do, the fainter the object is, the less light is going to get to your eye. It's I know it's funny how that works, but the more you magnify, the less light you're actually going to have meet your eye. So you can zoom in a lot on NEOWISE with a 10 millimeter eyepiece versus a 20 millimeter eyepiece would give you a much wider field of view. NEOWISE would look much smaller in it, but as it looks smaller, it will look brighter. Versus going to the 10 millimeter, it will be bigger, but it will be dimmer. But I'm saying you'll still be able to see NEOWISE with a 3-inch telescope, better than you would be able to see it with binoculars, depending on the binoculars. Astronomy is such a simple and relatively affordable hobby to get into. The return on investment for any level of astronomy that you invest in is so much greater than whatever you spend on it. I highly recommend cruising on to Amazon or wherever and just put in a parameter, your budget $50, and to see what telescopes you can get. Get a 3-inch reflector telescope, 104 millimeter reflector telescope, whatever, starter telescope that comes with a couple of eyepieces, and you'll be all set. Usually they are Dobsonian mounts, and Dobsonian just means it's a 360-degree mount where you can turn the telescope left and right, up and down freely. It doesn't automatically track any of the objects you're looking at. It's not a German equatorial mount, which requires a little bit more alignment and a little bit more know-how and practice to align just right, and a little bit more rigmarole. I think Dobsonian is a good place to start, though, and I think most astronomers would tell you that a Dobsonian telescope, which is 99% of what you're going to buy in a beginner scope anyways, is the best place to start, because it's going to teach you the valuable tool of star tracking, of trial and error, trying to line up whatever object you want to see just right, and then focus it just right, and then use your hands to delicately move the telescope to follow the object. Because when let's say you get Jupiter in your eyepiece through your telescope, through your Dobsonian telescope, you're going to look in the eyepiece and you're going to see Jupiter, and you're going to see it moving quite quickly across the field of view, because that's the Earth rotating. Whereas on a German equatorial mount, there's a little knob you can spin that once you get the object centered, you just turn the knob and it turns with the rotation of the Earth, so that you can just very finely twist that knob and keep that object perfectly in the center of your eyepiece the whole time. Just takes a little bit more work. Dobsonian mount, it's a great place to start with astronomy. You can get a Dobsonian reflector telescope relatively cheap, seriously $50, probably even cheaper sometimes, get you in the door with a 3-inch reflector telescope. And you'll be all set, all good to go, and it's perfect. It's perfect to bring out, because what happens for a lot of people when they get a telescope is you'll bring it out once or twice, and then you're going to put it away. Some people put it away forever. But as long as you know where it is, because you can see the moon so many times, you can look at Saturn so many times, you can look at Jupiter so many times, you can look at Mars so many times, you can look at the Orion Nebula so many times, you can look at M31 and Andromeda so many times, galaxies so many times, that you might get a little tired of looking at the same things over and over again. But if you do inevitably put your telescope away somewhere, just keep in mind where you left it. For instances like comet NEOWISE, just remember where you left the telescope. Keep it handy for any of these celestial events, that it's quick and easy just to grab the telescope out of the closet, keep the dust cover on it so it's not all dusty and murky next time you bring it out. But you can bring it out for these special celestial events. Lunar eclipses, not solar eclipses. Don't you dare look through a telescope with your naked eye at a solar eclipse. Yeah, it's a fun experiment. I don't recommend this. I've done it once or twice with eyepieces that I don't care about, but I have a big 8-inch scope. 8 inches diameter. It's the opening. It's how big the reflector is, the mirror is on the other side of the telescope. You get an eyepiece, like a 6 millimeter eyepiece, and you aim the telescope at the sun. Don't look through it. Do not look through it. And use an eyepiece that you don't care about, because things can get hot. But you aim it at the sun, and then you take a piece of paper or a leaf or a piece of wood and you just put it next to the eyepiece. It'll burn it, just like a magnifying glass burning leaves. You'll get the same exact effect like a laser beam coming out of the eyepiece, and that will burn right through a piece of paper like there's nothing there. It'll burn through a leaf like there's nothing there. It'll set fire to a piece of wood. It's intense. It will make things burst into flames that you keep next to the eyepiece. So imagine putting your eyeball up to it. Do not do it. You won't just go blind. You will actually burn a hole into your eyeball. Don't do it. But anyways, just keep the telescope handy, for looking at Saturn and Jupiter and the moon, and you get tired of it, but just keep it somewhere nearby, so when a comet comes by like NEOWISE, you can whip it out and see the tail of it and see a much better view of it. I love my telescope. I love astrophotography. I love picking it up after, a hiatus. I'm really glad I took those pictures last night. Really, really glad I took those pictures last night. It's a little bit of a hassle to get things set up, but it's so worth it. All right, so let's wrap things up with NEOWISE a little bit. NEOWISE, I'm seeing some writing here about, is NEOWISE a great comet? So a great comet would be like Halley's Comet. I think Halley's Comet comes around once every 80 years or so, 76 years or so, whatever the exact number is. It's very bright in the sky. You can see it with a naked eye. You could even see it in the daytime if conditions were just right. That's a great comet. The last great comet we have, for those of you who remember it, was Hale-Bopp in 1997. I remember how old was I? 15 or so in 1997. Hale-Bopp, Heaven's Gate, all those people who committed suicide that thought, because their leader thought there was a spaceship that would lead them to heaven behind Hale-Bopp. But regardless, Hale-Bopp comet was the last great comet that we've had in our skies, and that was 1997. I remember as a kid getting out in the cul-de-sac and just staring at it. Don't even need binoculars, just looking up in the sky and seeing Hale-Bopp. And I remember a particularly very bright full moon night looking at Hale-Bopp and the moon, and it was perfectly visible with all the light pollution that the moon put out. So Hale-Bopp in 1997 was the last great comet. NEOWISE is not a great comet because a lot of people will not be able to see it with their naked eye. Some people can, some people can't, but it's just too dim. And because it's just right on the cusp of being too dim, it is nowhere near being a great comet. It's an awesome comet to view if you have a basic set of binoculars, a telescope for sure. If you want to whip out your camera, your decent camera, and do a long exposure shot of that quadrant of the sky, it's great for viewing in that way, but it is not a great comet. Interestingly enough, if you miss NEOWISE now, the next chance you're going to have to see it, if it doesn't burn itself out, is the year 8,786. It is quite a large orbit for comet NEOWISE, so I don't think any of us are going to live another almost 7,000 years. So look at NEOWISE now while you can. The core of NEOWISE, these are all the nitty-gritty things that I like to learn about. The core of NEOWISE, where did I see it? It's hard. It's hard for observers to get a clear picture of the core because of the tail, because of all the ejection going on with NEOWISE. But the core of it, scientists have been able to gather from its infrared signature that the nucleus of the comet is about 3 miles or 5 kilometers across. From this scientist, this is from Joseph Mazzario. He's the NEOWISE Deputy Principal Investigator at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He said this, I'm just going to quote it all from him. From its infrared signature, we can tell its nucleus is about 3 miles or 5 kilometers across and is covered with sooty, dark particles left over from its formation near the birth of our solar system 4.6 million years ago. End quote. Now you know that the nucleus of the comet is about 3 miles wide, and it's dark and sooty. I didn't see that they mentioned what it's actually made of. Like most comets, I would imagine it's made of ice. A lot of ice, a lot of water ice. It could possibly be frozen methane. It can really be anything. But I'm not seeing here what exactly it is made of. Let's see if I can find that, actually. Let me look somewhere else. Okay, I was pretty much right in my assumption. It's made of ice, rock, and dust, just like most comets. So anyways, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I keep forgetting if there was something else I wanted to mention. I'm not sure if I should mention this or just leave it alone. I'm not going to talk much more about my car issue right now. No, Rowdy is not starting yet. I'm got another whiff of a trail to take. It's going to be electrical. It's going to be whipping out my voltmeter and just going through the power delivery to the ECU. But I ain't going to spend a whole lot of time on that anymore. I'll let you know when it's fixed and what it was, but I'm not going to. That's beating a dead horse. And frankly, I'm sick of looking. I'm sick of looking at it. in the driveway right now. I am dreaming of this. I am dreaming of this issue. I'm literally dreaming about relays and wires and modules. Oh my gosh, it is eating me up alive psychologically that I haven't been able to fix this yet. I'm not losing sleep over it. I'm still sleeping like a baby. I'm not losing sleep. It's not causing any health effects, but I really like fixing things. And I haven't been able to fix this over the past, it's probably going on 3 or 4 weeks now. So it's on the top of my mind subconsciously. It's going to make it feel great when I actually start the engine for the first time. When I find that frayed wire or whatever it is and start the engine, that's what it's going to be all about. And that's the only reason why I really tell you guys about it, because I want to collectively breathe a sigh of relief when I finally fix it. Moreover, I'm hoping it will inspire you to problem solve and to dive into things and not be too scared of trying to fix things. And I won't go onto a big tangent here about, we live in a throwaway culture, but we kind of do. And the idea of fixing things is pretty much a lost art. So if you are still able to fix things, if you have any sort of common sense with a wrench or a hammer or a voltmeter, just basic amateur level concepts, you can fix most things in your life. And yes, this car is kicking my butt for the past month, but eventually it'll be fixed, and I'm just exhausting every avenue I can before I suck it up and bring it to the mechanic. Gosh, it eats me alive. That is probably something stupid. Here's another way to think about it, and this is what I'll say to wrap up. A lot of people problem solve, or they try to fix something, whether it's something personal or an actual mechanical something. Every time they try something that doesn't work, for some people that's a blow. That's a psychological blow. It makes them feel like they're not good enough. They can't fix it. It's everything is doomed. All is lost because what they tried didn't work. But here's the thing. Here's the actual truth. Every time I work on something that doesn't work, every time I check a component and that wasn't it, or a sensor and that wasn't it, or a module and that wasn't it, every little theory that I try and it doesn't fix the thing, I can check it off the list methodically. What you're actually doing is getting closer and closer and closer to a solution. It's not kicking your ass every time. Sorry, pardon my French, I apologize. It's not kicking your butt every single time. You're actually getting closer and closer and closer to the solution. And that's the reality of it all. It's all perspective. It's all how you look at it. And that's one reason I keep working on Rowdy, is because I know it's not beating me necessarily. I'm getting closer and closer to the solution. So when I finally do find the solution, I can turn that key over, metaphorically speaking, push the start button and have that engine fire up and just know that I didn't let it defeat me. And that's what it's all about, having the courage to try something. And then it's not just courage to try something. That's the easy part. Trying it, the tiny little spurt of courage that it takes to try something is nothing. It's that ongoing courage that every time the problem kicks you to the ground, you pick yourself back up. And when you really don't want to, you hate this, you hate what you're doing, you hate the fact that you don't feel like you're making any progress. That's the real courage. That's the real character building right there. And it'll help you realize that there's so many things in your life that if you just don't give up on it, you can actually achieve great things. You can actually fix it just by the mere idea of not giving up on it. Through the sheer act of continuing to think about it. A lot of times, the best way to work on a problem is just to take yourself out of it. I've talked about it with the DeLorean when I replaced the radiator fans, and that whole little blurb in the service manual about you'll have to get into with some clever ingenuity, you can do it. I'm just like, what? Dexterity was the word. With some dexterity, you can do this. I'm like, I had to get away from it for an hour to think about. I get an idea to where to do it. Thinking about it at night before you go to bed. You'll have these eureka moments. You'll be in the shower. Oh, I need to check that relay. Oh, I need to check voltage to this wire. Oh, I need to check. Oh, I need a whatever. just from thinking about it, not looking at it, and just thinking about it on your own time. But I'll wrap it up there. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Be sure to follow Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff. Remember, I posted my photos and a video of my astrophotography on Instagram and YouTube. So just check for Geek Therapy Radio in those avenues, and it's all good. Email me anytime you want, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. You can also contact me right through the website, geektherapyradio.com. Be good to each other, including yourself. You are capable. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-confidence. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.